Welcome to the New Planner Podcast, where it's all about helping you successfully enter the financial planning profession and accelerate your financial planning career. This podcast will help you understand the profession, become familiar with the various career paths available to you, and avoid the mistakes that limit your success. Join your host, Caleb Brown, to explore the human side of creating a successful planning career through interviews, personal experience, and insights from the trenches. Let's get started.
Welcome to the 242nd episode of the New Planner Podcast. This is Caleb Brown, your host. My guest today is Dustin Cidorowich, who is an associate financial planner at Rogé Company. Dustin joins the show today to share his journey from corporate America to an entry-level financial planner position and what his role entailed and how he navigated a substantial pay cut. He goes on to share how his role and responsibilities have grown, the most difficult thing for him to learn, and how he adds value to the firm. Stay tuned to the end to hear his thoughts on what the most fun part of the job is and a few other tips for new planners. I hope you enjoy this episode with Dustin Cidorowich. Before we get started, a quick thanks to our sponsor, Dalton Education. Earning the CFP is one of the most powerful ways to launch a career in financial planning. It builds your credibility, boosts your confidence, and shows clients you're ready to make an impact on day one. At Dalton, they believe the CFP earns you a seat at the client table, but what you learn in the education program is what keeps you there. Their CFP FastPass program gets you exam ready in just 6 months through a comprehensive instructor-led course. Stay on track and you'll be on pace to pass the CFP exam in under 9 months, start to finish. And to make it even more accessible, they're offering a $3,000 Career Changer Scholarship or 15% off for listeners of this podcast. Check the show notes for the link and details. Hi, Dustin. Welcome to the New Planner Podcast.
Hi, Caleb. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for asking. Hey, I just want to start out having you talk about what you're doing, because you've almost been in your new role in your new career for a year, at least at the time of recording. By the time this airs, it's probably going to be a little over a year. Associate planner. What does that mean in your firm, and what are you doing all day?
It might be a little bit different at our firm because, from what I understand, a lot of firms operate with lead advisors kind of running their own book of business and having other associates help along the way. But at Rogé, we don't operate like the traditional IRA, at least, how I envision them. It is kind of a shared book of business. Everyone maybe has specialties, but there's no specific advisor assigned to every client. So for somebody like me starting out, that's been great because I learn best with real world experience. And I've been able to get thrown into every situation that, you could think of. I get invited to a lot of meetings just to learn, for the most part. So I do a little bit of everything. I help out with the client service associate stuff. It's always good to learn, the systems and the processes and all that. I sit on a lot of check-in calls, portfolio reviews. I've been working on more so with the financial plans themselves, more so on updates than, starting new plans for new clients. That seems to be a little bit easier bridgeway to kind of learn all the ins and outs. We have a weekly investment meeting to try to learn about, for me, it's more of a learning thing. I'm asking questions, but, I really am getting to exposure to, all aspects of this business, which is great, And the other thing that I really love, at least about my current setup, is I'm working with different advisors and they all have their different styles and how they approach things. And for somebody like me, I'm still at a point in my career where my goal is to learn, right? That's the number one thing for me right now. And getting to work with all these different individuals, you can kind of see different styles and pick up on things and, figure out what might work best for me, down the road. So, again, I feel like it's a little bit unique as far as how Rogé operates, with that kind of shared book, but I feel like there's a lot of positives for somebody breaking into the industry to kind of learn everything.
Thus far, you're still early on, as we've identified. What's been the most difficult skill to learn so far?
Maybe the non-financial aspect of the communication with these clients. So I'm so focused on getting everything right because I don't know everything that maybe sometimes I skip over, the courtesies and stuff like that and checking in on every little thing. And I know that's an important part. And there are certain people where that is a lot more natural for me, where I've already built up that relationship and it just kind of fits in natural. But there's other ones where I'm so focused on a particular task and making sure I understand how I'm going to discuss this or talk about this, where I sometimes maybe jump right into the goal of the meeting and maybe spend a little less time than I should on kind of catching up. And because we are a firm that really does believe in cultivating these client relationships. We are not this cutthroat sales operation where they're just going out high. We it's a laid back place. And the most important thing is these client relationships. So that's something that I felt I would be naturally good at, but I feel like I'm often distracted just because I'm trying to learn everything and figure out everything as I go. So that's been a challenge for me that I know I have to work on.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, I mean, I'd worked like 2 or 3 weeks on this plan, stayed up all night, and the client gets in there and they didn't want to talk about any of that stuff. They wanted just to chit chat about grandkids and trips and stuff. And I'm just like, can we just get to the, like, just, can we just go through the investments and go, and like, and then my senior advisor was like, no, we don't, we push that aside. We push that aside.
But I actually do enjoy that part because for me, some of these advisors who've worked with these clients for years, they know everyone. I don't know these people. So that really helps me remember them, the next time I deal with them. So I do enjoy that. I just need to be better about initiating more of that rather than letting them initiate. So
Got it. So you said something earlier. You said, I learn best with real world experience. Now, you've been fortunate enough to be able to be hired into a position where it's entry level, it's a salary situation. You don't have to bring on clients, at least immediately. There's a lot of other career changers like, man, Dustin, that sounds great. I want to get real world experience too, but I'm barred from getting hired. I see this every day in the recruiting firm because I don't have the real world client experience, but I can't get anybody to hire me. How would you suggest they get that before they're starting their career? Or is it even possible?
that's a good question. So I guess going back to when I was starting to figure out my transition into this field, some of the things that, I was fortunate enough to land in a good spot where I do get a lot of exposure to a lot of things and can kind of move up into an advisory role, maybe a little bit quicker than I might have envisioned. But when I was looking for roles, I thought the best path in was more of a back office type role, maybe a client service associate, a para planner type role, maybe an operations type role where I could get in without the experience, kind of learn from the inside and then grow from there. So, that was kind of my baseline with, as far as what I expected might happen. And I was fortunate to get this connection and that's worked out well. So there may be better ways to get into this industry, without the experience. But for me, I was willing to go in at what I considered an entry level job, like a client service associate or some back office associate just to learn and grow from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's Amplified Planning, Anna Moore, and then there's Cody Garrett, Measure Twice. And those are two sort of similar programs to help people get. But I was just trying to think beyond that if you had any ideas.
Yeah. So one of the things I guess I don't know the right place to, add this little tidbit in, but for somebody like me, one of the things I would recommend, I guess, I don't know if it's giving me real world planning experience, but when I first started down this path, before I knew I was going to, you know, uh, pivot towards the RIA side, reading online about this, the first thing that always comes up is to take your SIE, your securities industry exam or something like that. It's kind of like the
Industry essentials. Yeah.
industry essentials, right? The prerequisite to the Series 7 nowadays. So I didn't actually need that for this, the RIA side of the house. You just need your 65. But for somebody like me who hasn't taken a finance class since college, that's 20 years ago almost at this point, that was actually not necessarily beneficial to pass the test, but it was beneficial to learn, right? That was a cheap and easy way to get a crash course refresher on a lot of things that I had forgotten about in college. So, if you're just coming out of college, this isn't really applicable, but that for somebody like me kind of offered a lot of training, it just getting back to a lot of the finance basics and stuff you might need to know to help you move forward at a quicker pace.
All right, you said you were in school 20 years ago, and we already established that you've been doing financial planning for 1 year. So obviously a career changer.
A little bit of an odd path, right?
What was your career? Talk to us about your career before this and then how financial planning, how you became interested in that.
Yeah, so I'll go one step back before my last career just to kind of level set, my background before I even got into a professional career. So I was always a math and science guy. Those were my areas of interest. Thought I might go down the engineering route in college. Had some issues learning with learning styles for a particular teacher, so kind of pivoted to the statistics and mathematics side. But coming out of college, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I ended up linking up with the company that I had been with for the 15 or 16 years prior to making this career change shortly after college. It was a property and casualty insurance company. Not that I had any interest in property and casualty insurance, but it was more about they had an analyst development program, which was one of those rotational programs. And for somebody like me who wasn't sure what I wanted to do, that was appealing, right? Where you might get exposure to different parts of the business and find something that might appeal to you. Early on in that, they might actually stop the rotation and place you in an area that they need help with. So started working as a pricing analyst, worked my way up into some managerial roles. And then for the last 8 or 9 years, I'd say I had a similar role. The official title was pricing system architect. That doesn't mean a whole lot, but I was responsible for managing, maintaining, and developing the rating and underwriting engine for our insurance company, for our auto, home, and umbrella insurance. So, we would do the development. We would, when we wanted to try to introduce a new rule or new product, we would help figure out the best way to do that or help the product analysts figure out what they could and couldn't do, and we kind of had our hands on everything because we were kind of like the brain. So any sort of project we had to be involved with in some capacity. So I grew into that role. That position didn't exist when I started there. It, was kind of created out of necessity and the evolving IT landscape at our particular company. And I picked things up and became very good at what I did. So it was a natural fit. The role was created and I loved it for a while. There's, a lot of problem solving stuff early on, but eventually things just got a little dull, I guess. I began to feel a little bit more disconnected from the work. The excitement I had early on was gone. So, our company was going through some, transitional changes. So that kind of allowed me to step out of my comfort zone a little bit and make a decision about what I wanted to do next. So
That's great. Hey, kudos on they created it. At least what I heard, they created a job for you
yeah,
at the. A lot of times they don't do that, and that's rare in corporate America. That can happen a lot more frequently in these smaller financial planning firms that I deal with. So pick it up. So math, science, statistics in corporate America, you kind of sounds like plateaued, sort of peaked out. I mean, just walk us like you were the guy, like the subject matter expert in this other field, in this other industry, and then you say, I'm leaving that. I'm going to go start all over. How was that just from an emotional, and also, if I remember correctly, you took a pretty substantial pay cut. So the financial side as well.
yeah, it was a tough decision. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy. I am glad I did it. And, if you were to ask the question, what do you regret? I regret not doing this earlier, to be honest. But it wasn't easy, and there has been some road bumps along the way too. Yes, it was a significant pay cut. I was in an IT-ish based role, that I'd been at for a long time. And I think you actually you mentioned this before. You were encouraged by my willingness to take a large pay cut. And, I'm not coming in expecting to make a ton of money. What value am I adding to these new firms right away? So I was completely open to that, and learning and starting back from the ground up. We had built up a nice nest egg. I had made some decent real estate investments and houses. I mean, I got lucky. I bought my first condo right after the market crashed in '09 or '08.
Nice job.
So
Yeah.
there was some luck involved, but point being is I was in a position where there was enough of a buffer, talked to my wife, figured things out, draw down from the savings for a few years to make this change. And she was supportive of it. So that was a big help.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you just give us a percentage reduction? If you're a math stats guy, so I'm putting you on the spot here.
About 40% of what I was making before.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing.
And I also have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I have 2 young kids,
Yeah.
right? That's also costly. So there was a lot of stuff going on that weighed into this decision. So it was a big decision at that time to switch. I will say I have no desire to go back at all, but I always kind of had in the back of my mind, based on my experience, I was confident that I could get back into a role on that software side of what I was doing, in a year or two if I needed to, if things weren't working out. So I didn't want to rely on that, but that was maybe something I told myself as a reassuring way, to kind of move forward with what I thought I wanted to do.
Got it. Yeah. And I remember when we talked, I was like, hey, I know you're okay with this, but if you talk to the spouse, I mean, I want to make sure she signs off on this because it is a big risk. But okay, so it sounds like it's paying off for you. And like maybe just to bring it full circle, Maybe just describe your first 90 days and how it was different than it is now.
Yeah, I feel like the first 90 days were completely different. We are a small firm, so it's not like you have all that you can't spend all day training and learning from the other advisors, right? They have a full-time job to do. So a lot of it was self-learning. There's a lot of free time. I had started studying and had signed up to take my Series 65 exam before I had interviewed and got hired, but my actual exam was like 2 weeks into my new career. So like I was able to use some free time around the office because when you first start, there's not a lot you can do. So I was able to use some time to study to pass that. I was going to start pursuing the CFP right after that. My boss, the owner of the company, actually asked if I wouldn't mind taking a couple months to get a paraplanner designation instead, just to get some designation and then pursue that. So again, there was a lot of studying because I had free time at the office. I was doing my best to learn what I could. I was trying to learn the systems on my own and, watch webinars and do tutorials and all that as much as I could. Then we started doing what we call these check-in calls. So obviously, anytime a client calls in, we're going to talk to them and help them with whatever we can. But we also like to try to be proactive and do these semi-annual check-ins with as many clients as we can just to stay in touch with them. So that was probably the first regular workload I had where I was doing, we had 3 different advisors handling all these meetings, and I was doing the pre-meeting prep work for all of them and handling a lot of the post-meeting tasks. So I would sit in on each of them, which was great to learn and talk to these clients and everything. But that's when that was probably about 3 months in maybe. That's when my schedule started getting really busy. And I'll transition into one of the challenges I faced compared to my last job. I would probably have 25 plus meetings a week, and most of them were consultative in nature, where I'd get called into a meeting, to help provide my expertise and tell other people what they would need to do to accomplish whatever they were looking for. My workload was a lot more structured, so I was able to handle that around all these meetings. This is a completely different world as far as, the client meetings. There's a lot more time and energy that needs to go into these, which I understood that, but I didn't realize the full extent. So I remember there was 1 week early on where I think we had like 18 client meetings. And remember, these are being split between 3 other advisors. So they don't have 18, but I think I had 18 client meetings in a week. And maybe for really seasoned advisors, they can handle that. But I remember being backed up and, had to spend a lot of time that weekend catching up on things. And the next time around, I was like, okay, we need to stagger these a little bit better. I now know what goes into the prep work for these and the takeaways and stuff. So that was a challenge for me. But yeah, at this point, beyond 90 days, I'm rebalancing and making trades in portfolios, still helping with some of the client service associate stuff. I don't take many meetings by myself, but I do have phone calls and have email chains, where I am, responding to clients. I know what I don't know, so I'll check in with an advisor if I need help or have questions or, may need to research something. But yeah, sitting on a lot of different meetings. So again, getting exposure to everything at this point.
And you may have answered this a little bit based on what you just said, but how did you add? I mean, can you think of other specific examples on how you did add value in those early days?
So there was a couple minor things, I guess. We have some daily reports and there'd be like ad hoc requests for data. And that ties into stuff that I was a lot more familiar with, right? Pulling out data queries, pulling that out. At my last job, a lot of the development we did was Excel based. So, I was able to help organize some of the daily processes and data gathering things for the other folks and try to enhance some of those processes as much as possible. I was also the pilot for a couple new software. The main one being I know AI note taker seems to be a expanding aspect of this industry. So, I had the license for our AI note taker that we're using and was kind of helping everyone with that. But yeah, generally when there's like a software thing, I might be involved to help out and try to figure out how to integrate that in our company. Not that we're doing that all the time, but
Got it. What's been the most fun, rewarding, fulfilling, however you want to describe it, part of the job thus far?
want to say this without getting bogged down in the current environment of the markets, but we have a client they're like a great case study where they didn't have a lot. They've been a long time client. They saved up great over the years. They don't spend above their means and they grew their portfolio and their overall assets to a place where they're now retiring. They were forced to retire essentially, but they're so well funded, they're at a 99% Monte Carlo in their financial plan update, right? So it's a great story, and you're rooting for them because they do everything right. They take your advice, they ask the right questions, right? And with the initial market turmoil, they were very stressed. It's human nature. We all know this. But again, they are still in a position where that doesn't impact their portfolio at all, but they can't help being stressed. So I spent extra time looking at a bunch of different ways to frame the data for them, after we did the plan update, to show them, to try to do my best to alleviate their concerns, even with everything that's going on, being like, yes, this should be concerning for some people and it's human nature for you guys to be concerned, but this changes your safety margin from a ton of money to a little less ton of money. You guys don't need to be worried about this. And I think after really drilling that down and presenting a few different apocalyptic scenarios and showing that they'll still be all right, I think they finally got to the point where they were appreciative of, all the above and beyond and able to finally relax. And so I guess I'm sure other advisors are dealing with this all the time, but a lot of the plans I've dealt with have not been as in great of a position, and they do need to maybe worry a little bit more or adjust their behaviors. So it was good to be able to put somebody's mind at ease that should be able to enjoy their retirement, I guess.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that example.
A little long-winded. I don't know if there's a better way to summarize that.
I really appreciate it. I feel like we could talk all day, but it's been good to catch up with you. Any final tips or thoughts that you want to leave the New Planner audience with?
I feel like this industry probably benefits from diverse backgrounds. I know the standard background is going through finance, coming out of college, and that's good to have those people in the industry, right? But I also feel like there's a benefit to having people with other, backgrounds. Don't let imposter syndrome get in the way. Your confidence can waver early on. That's one of the other issues I still deal with, not necessarily daily, but as you said, I went from being the subject matter expert, the go-to person, to not knowing anything. And that can mess with you mentally a little bit, but it's natural. I just keep telling myself I didn't get to where I was overnight. It took me a while to get there. So, seasoned advisors don't know everything either, right? They still I see people who've been doing this 20, 30 years. They're still researching things and collaborating with each other. So that, again, that's a thing I tell myself to, help with my confidence issues, without the full set of skills. And yeah, knowing what you know and what you don't know, it's better to get back to a client if you don't know something than try to give them the wrong answer sounding confident on the spot. So I think that's about it.
That's great advice.
Grateful to be in the field now and excited for the journey ahead.
Dustin, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I appreciate you having me, Caleb. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the New Planner Podcast. If you're ready to discover the top career paths for financial planners and see which track is best for you, we created a free guide to help you. Grab your copy of the Financial Planner Career Roadmap at newplannerrecruiting.com/roadmap. There, you'll also find more tools and resources all created to help you build a successful financial planning career. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, we're here to help you succeed.